Issues. I do have answers on the land issue because out of everything I've studied, that's the one I've studied more than others, and written 250 pages on it, given to the government. The government did nothing about it. And they get surprised when they get 40%. Then they wonder why, But there it is. You promise people land, you never gave it to them. Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, no, I apologize. No, I was criticizing the ANC government again. So. No, I think on land, what the ANC did is totally inexcusable. It's really, really inexcusable. In the CODESA and Constitutional Assembly, they faced a formidable opponent in the National Party. Sheila Kamara was the spokesperson on property. Very, very, very formidable, right? On 3 issues. 1, do we need a property clause? Number 2, do we need a right of restitution, right of return? Number 3, do we need the power of expropriation? The ANC won all of them. They won each and every one of those arguments. They got it in. There is no right to property. There is a right of the state to expropriate. There is a right of return. They are all in the Constitution. Very few countries have constitutionalized property transformation to that extent. Very few, you see. Because everyone is so touched when it comes to property. Property is almost perceived as an extension of yourself, perceived in the same category as a freedom of speech, but it is not, because property is an external thing to a human, but it's a human right, So now, after they won this discussion, they won everything, and they signed the Constitution in 1996. Signed it, 31st of May, 1996. They signed it. The following year, in 1997, they adopted a white paper on land. What did it do? The first thing it did was that land would be acquired on a willing seller, willing buyer basis as a government policy, which was a complete betrayal of what they had just achieved a year earlier. The consequence has been that since 1997, since the white paper, the policy of the state has been to acquire land for all purposes on market-related standards. Sometimes, and I've spoken to the Department of Housing, how do you acquire land if you want to build a township? They pay on what they call the best possible use, best and highest possible use of the land, which is more than the market value. It's more than the market value. This is why when I asked the minister, the former Minister of Land Affairs at Gibbs, I think in 2017, I asked, how much has your government paid for land reform? Since you became the government in 1994, how much have you paid? So 60 billion. So I asked, where's the money gone? You see, where's the money gone? And then he says, well, the majority of it has gone to white farmers, white landowners. I said, but don't you think this is a scandal that you got upset and then, became personal and the conversation ended? It was, no, it was not Togo Didis. Togo Didis has probably been one of the better ministers. No. It was Mashabane. Yes. Maite Ngwane Mashabane. Yeah, she was the minister. Yeah, exactly. You see, so and the conversation ended there. So where you've got the law on your side, the right to expropriate, it's there, it's written in black and white. And you've got the right of return, it's also there, it's black and white. And you have no right to property. Why have they not done anything about land? Like, what's the reason? Now, the same thing in 2018, they had these discussions, went around the country. They were asking people, do you want land? So this was a referendum. They asked black people, do you want land? What did they think the answer was going to be? And this thing went on for 8 months. For 8 months. Today they are in Limpopo, tomorrow they're in Mpumalanga, the other day they're in the Eastern Cape, and then a lot of people go into this meeting. So what is the question on the referendum? Do you want land? I mean, so something else has been going on in the government, which it's impossible for me to understand. You know? But it's got nothing to do with the law. It's got nothing to do with the policy. And by the way, you know, I'm glad you've raised this question. The person who spoke the most about being committed to transformation was Jacob Zuma. But when you actually look at budgetary allocations for land, there was a decline in the budget allocated for land during his presidency. That decline has continued under Ramaphosa's government. And the area where there was the greatest redistribution of land was Mandela and Thabo Mbeki. In fact, even with Thabo Mbeki, it was in the first 5 years of his government, where you see a real increase in the redistribution of land and a real increase in the budget. Thereafter, they took their eyes off the ball. They just did nothing about it. So I was at the last ANC conference in Nazareth, and I went specifically to the Commission on Economic Transformation, because that's where I saw that the land issue was going to be discussed. I went to that commission. I just wanted to listen. Like, why are we doing nothing about it? And I was just shocked at the nonsense that was espoused, because it was a repetition of what landowners want. You know. So what I found is that the land policy, the actual land policy, is driven by white property interests. So they will talk about, I mean, one of the suggestions was, what about donations, land donations? You cannot have a land strategy that's dependent on donations. I mean, this just doesn't work. So you say, what is it, political will, etc. I just don't know. I'm completely puzzled to explain and understand the ANC's reluctance to address land. The Constitutional Court has also said this. It says, we just don't understand. You know, the Supreme Court of Appeal says the same thing. When I was acting judge in the Land Claims Court, I just couldn't understand. I just found the cases I did, 70% of them were eviction cases. It was landowners evicting black people from land. And the government was almost like impotent. There's nothing we can do about it. But this is a court you've established for transformation. And why is it not doing its job? You know? So I still cannot understand what's wrong with the ANC and its approach. Let's ask Comrade Jewel. Because I speak as an outsider. I really speak as an outsider, just completely puzzled at why have these people behaved like this. It's just impossible for me to understand. What I have seen in the Eastern Cape, they do have a land redistribution program. The problem has been recorded in a report published by the UWC outfit, where they say that the beneficiaries, they call this elite capture. Beneficiaries of land reform are people that are politically connected, or they have families working there, etc. They're not real farmers, you know. They're part-time farming. They go there on a weekend and they throw a big part, but they're not really farmers, you know. And those are the people that are really at the forefront. And that is also confirmed by the report by the SIU. I quoted that report in my book, the SIU, which showed 1 in every 4 land claims is corrupt. 1 in every 4 land claims is corrupt. It's astonishing. 25% of all land claims are corrupt. The figures are just astonishing. So if you have a country as corrupt as South Africa, I think it's inevitable that an asset as important as land would also be corrupt. So unless someone actually addresses the structural problems with it, I mean, I think we're going to go nowhere. But what is the explanation? I just don't know. It's just impossible to understand. David, I see your point about you saying that the party, okay, fine. The fact is that, you know, sometimes, you know, just like sometimes you just wonder what's going on in this country, because it's the party system that has got us where we are. So something radical has to change. You know, it's the party system. We're here because of the party system. So another defense of the party system means another 30 years of the crisis. You know, so that's what I don't fully grasp about the thing. Sure, you don't like a constituency model, But the mishmash of independence and individuals that the ANC produced, because it was the majority in that committee, and look at what it produced. Even when you went to vote, you just didn't understand what is the region, what is the province, how does it differ, etc. You know, because what they were trying to do, they were trying to avoid a full-scale constituency model. They thought they were protecting the party. What they produced in the end was this idea that you, as David, you can just compile a list without any names and then fill it up as you go along. Or you can compile a list with names that you took from your village. And then when you get elected, it's only then that you will choose which names will go forward. This is enabled by the ANC because it could have changed the system so that it makes it truly representative. And sure, it may not be a constituency model, but this current model, I don't know if you say, well, the current model works, because the current model has produced the kind of non-participation by the public. And that's the only point I was trying to surface, is that this system has been rejected by voters. You know, but sure, I mean, if the ANC wants to continue like this, fine. You know, then in the next election, then maybe we'll have a new government. You know, so not a GNU of some sort. Yeah. So I think I don't have to answer everything. So what should I say now? The children's rights, yeah. I don't know what needs to be done. But what I do think is a problem is what is going on right now. Other countries have got different models, by the way. We do have it even here. Children's parliament, that's another model. Even at local government level, you know, having specific committees that are focused on children. Even participation at school committee level, you know, having specific committees that are focused on children and that run by children. But that's not the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make is that for the first time since 1994, we now have children dying of malnutrition. And they are dying of malnutrition in circumstances that are avoidable. You see, that is the real crisis of constitutionalism. Is why is this constitution producing stunted children? So that's the question. And the problem with stunted children is also because they are the most vulnerable. They are unlike me and you, who can make noise, but they can't make noise. You know, so there's something wrong in a society that produces stunted children in the land of plenty. I understand if we're all poor, but the point is that we've got this 20% that is enjoying 80% of the economic rewards, and the 80% that has to share the 20%.
I just want to abuse my prerogative as the program director. What does Einstein say about doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result? I think he says it's a definition of madness. I think anyone who can genuinely say the kind of voter system that we have that has been rejected by our people, I mean, if 39% of eligible voters show up, why would you want to continue with that? Surely, I mean, you should at least say, can we examine something else? But to actually double down on a voter system, electoral system that has been comprehensively rejected by our people, to me, it's just, it's crazy, it's humbug.
Advocate, I want to take some questions from the online audience. Yes, no, I'll come to you guys. Just let's address our colleagues who are online. There is a question from Mutlong who wants to know your thoughts about the place of traditional leadership in a constitutional order.
Can I answer that now?
Yes.
Oh, apparently they can't hear what I'm saying. All right, I apologize. Now, let's talk about the traditional leaders. I think the point I was making about traditional leaders is the distortion. There are, okay, maybe 3 issues to say about traditional leaders. Firstly, what is their place in a system of wall-to-wall municipalities? And when I say wall-to-wall, it's truly wall-to-wall. There is not a single square meter in this country that is not governed by a democratically elected institution. It's all to have 123 million square meters in this country. It's all regulated by law. It's all covered in the Systems Act, Structures Act. But every inch of this country is under a democratically elected system. Now, this was the crisis that faced the ANC, right, about what to do with traditional institutions and traditional leaders. Because on the one hand, the telos is democratization, but on the other, you are faced with the reality that traditional institutions exist. So what they did, they then included them in section 211, 212, 213, 214 of the Constitution. Say, the institution exists, it must function according to customary law, and it must find expression in parliament as well as in local government. But what is its power? Right? So that crisis of what is its power has not been resolved, and it stands in tension with democracy. Because the idea is that traditional institutions and traditional leaders are not exercising democratic power. That's not the same thing as saying they're not exercising legitimate power, but it's not democratic power. It's not people's power, you see. It could be inherited power, it could be other forms of power, but it's not people's power. And it always stays in tension with, and in fact, that's why some of these arguments, some people say, okay, we don't want the judges, but we want traditional leaders. So like, what are you talking about? So the first thing is if South Africa is serious about the wall-to-wall system, then power belongs to elected institutions. Political power belongs to elected institutions. And then what is the residual role then of traditional leaders? And maybe it's custom, right? Because the Constitution says functioning in accordance with customary law. So it's preservation of culture, it's preservation of custom. That's fine, because South Africa is, you know, multicultural society. So preservation of custom, sure, I accept and I agree with that. But, and here's the problem, custom is a community thing. It is a family thing, you see. So the idea of custom from above is actually against true customary law, because true customary law gives the voices of the people from below. That's what it listens to, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing has been control over land, and that is where the real disputes have been, is who controls the land. It's a Shepstein idea, or Shepstonian idea, like Theophilus Shepstein. The report he published 1844 to 1846 on the Natives Land Commission in Zululand. What they did with that is they reorganized what they refer to as tribes. They dismissed those chiefs they did not like. They appointed new chiefs, and then they recreated new tribes. You know, if you remember, 1873, Benjamin Pine issued a proclamation in which he said, the Hlubi tribe is from henceforth destroyed. It's no longer recognized as a tribe, the tribe of the Hlubis. This is the end of the tribe of the Hlubis from today onwards. And the chief, or the king, Langalbalel, is no longer recognized, you know, taken to a trial and then sent to Robben Island. You know, end of the tribe of the Hlubis. So the question then that arises is, what is their authority vis-a-vis the land, right? Now, the Shepstein idea was that in order to control the multitudes of native people, the chiefs, those that he approved of, right, had to be given control over ownership of the land. But that meant that you had to take the land from the people that were the actual owners of the land, right? Either you put it in the form of trusteeship or you put it in actual ownership. But you see, over time, we've now accepted this notion that chiefs own the land. But it's actually an anti-customary position, because the true customary position is that the land belongs to the people. It may be administered by the chief for functional reasons, but the ownership, you know, belongs to the people. And this is the problem we've had with Ingonyama Trust, which is why they got cross with me the other day, because I made this point that they are not the owners of the land. The owners of the land are the people living in Zululand at 2.5, 2.7 billion hectares, etc. So ownership of the land belongs to the people, doesn't belong to the chiefs. Then the final point is, who is the source of customary law? right? Who's the source of custom? And so where do you go to know? Okay, well, lobola is also a controversial thing because this was a law by Shepstone again, decided, well, 11 cows. It's not actually Zulu law. Shepstone just thumbsucked this thing up. So we have to transform custom, and the Constitution says custom must be transformed. We have to transform custom in order to address the problem of colonial distortions. You see. Unfortunately, as we do so, all of the privileges that the chiefs and the traditional leaders have received from apartheid and colonialism, they want to preserve them. And one of them was the control of land. You see. Now, unfortunately, the ANC government has gone along with the chiefs. Right? Why? They have this fallacious idea that if you go with the chiefs, you will go with the people. They don't understand that there's a fundamental conflict and a tension. I mean, the one good example, many, many cases I've done in this, one good example is if an owner of a mineral right wishes to exploit the minerals, who should they consult with? Take the example of Kolobeni. They did have the consent of the headman and the chief, but they did not have the consent of the community. And the government allowed them to proceed on the basis of the consent by the chief. Precisely, and so, and what happened? They also bought the chief a 4x4 vehicle. It was there in the papers. So they got a 4x4. Chief Baleni got a 4x4. And you can go there, Limpopo, you can go to Northwest, you can go to everywhere you go. In case everywhere you go, you've got the same problem, where there is a coalescence of interest between the politicians, the chiefs, and mine bosses. Right. It's not a surprise that the people are revolting against the party. It's not a surprise. These are things we've seen over and over again. Again, I wrote about this. It's in Land Matters. I wrote about this problem, what I call chiefly power. I wrote about this problem of chiefly power. But the ANC government has refused to respond to this crisis. This is a real crisis. I mean, Kolobeni was a very, very good example, where we had 98% of all households rejecting mining. 98% rejecting mining. And the government imposing it. Like imposing it against the interests of the communities. Really excellent. In terms of engaging with the substance of what I was trying to say. I think that the point about the conversation with Judge Ntahalta is a complex point. And I think in order for us to make it meaningful, we can concentrate on housing, which is the example you've chosen. In the early days, the ANC was extremely reluctant to sort of criminalize land occupation. And one can understand that it's a knee-jerk from the past. It's because in the 1950s, it was a crime for black people to occupy land, through various laws, etc. And so at the beginning, one of the first things they did was to pass laws that decriminalize land occupation, except that the common law continues, particularly laws like trespassing, etc. Right? But at the same time, they did not put developmental laws in place. In other words, if you decriminalize land occupation in a country where there is an acute shortage of housing, how do you balance the two? So Joe Slovo was one of the best examples of the consequences of decriminalization. It's large numbers of people finding a spot outside of the city center in the Western Cape. Right. Yeah. Joe Slovo was a minister of housing, so maybe it makes sense. So the so-called the informal settlement in Joe Slovo, which was at the time the largest informal settlement, was an illustration of the tension, right? Because on the one hand, the government says we need these people to leave because we want to put houses, You know, but at the same time, these people have a right not to be evicted unless alternative housing has been found. And then they say, well, the demand for alternative housing is interfering with the plans for development. You know, and then that's where the tension is. But what we have seen, and I had sympathy at the time, right? 20 years ago, I was completely sympathetic. I am no longer sympathetic now because the promises of development have tend to be not, right? Every time the government uses the defense that it has identified a particular piece of ground for development, it has not in fact developed that piece of ground, even where the judges have assisted the government by ejecting those communities. By the way, in Joe Slovo, there was an eviction order. So they were never prevented by a court from developing Joe Slovo, right? And they started, and then they abandoned the project in the middle. Now you can go everywhere else, Port Elizabeth, Johannesburg, everywhere. The government now uses this. It's become a fig leaf almost, this fig leaf of development, as conflicting with people's entitlement to occupation, which is why today's policy is no longer the same as the policy they took under Joe Slovo. Today's policy is to actually criminalize land occupation by sending the red ants. So that's today's government policy. So in many respects, it's now the government against the people again, right? And the conduct is actually reminiscent of the apartheid conduct. They just don't call it that. But in practice, that is how they have behaved. So it is true, over time, this tension has exploded. You know? And I think that although we could have been sympathetic to the government 30 years ago, we should no longer be, we should be impatient with them now, because they have promised development in housing, and those promises have come to nothing. Just finally, I acted in a case at Ekurhuleni. They built RDP houses, right? Built RDP houses. But there was corruption in the allocation, which in fact is also characteristic of the entire RDP system. And the people who were promised that they would be the first to be accommodated in the RDP housing decided to occupy those houses. They broke the windows and they broke the doors, and they took over the houses. The government then went to court and tried to evict them. We then defended it on the basis that the allocation system was fraught and corrupt, and there was nowhere else to go. And they had, in fact, made a promise that they would be the first. There's a judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal saying you have no right to evict them. So even the judges have lost patience with the unfulfilled promises of development by the government. So theoretically, you are right that there is an apparent tension between land occupation and development. But in practice, that tension does not exist, because the government lies about development. And in fact, more recent cases show that they admit that there's no budget for housing development. In fact, if you go to the Eastern Cape now, there are no housing developments. Even in Gauteng, there are no major housing developments. They say there's no money for them. In fact, the money that's available is going to other social programs, education, and so even those programs, they're actually reducing them slowly. Right. So where is development going to come from? Which is why I've argued in Land Matters that actually the criminalization, the de facto criminalization of land occupation should end. And we have to understand land occupation as part and parcel of development, which is a conversation the government refuses to have. You know? So it's like, okay, well, change the government. Let's remove the white people, let's put the black people. Oh, they behave like the same. So. I mean, your point about, you know, did we put too much faith in the Constitution? I think, anyway, you've put the point, it's a perfect point. I agree. I can't improve on it. Yeah.